protests, and kind of what you were describing as a very traditional model, and then the Occupy Wall Street model. And there's even two other examples that I think are really interesting. One is that what we have started to call snake marches, where it's kind of a spontaneous march, which usually happens after we've been kind of contained by the police in a specific space, and it's like our kind of getting out of that space and taking over the city in a spontaneous wildcat protest, which involves just a group of people. The one that I was about 100 people, and we were running through the streets, and the cops were chasing us, but because we could change our direction and kind of go wherever we wanted, we kind of kept them on the run. And there were people on the sides of the streets. We went through the East Village, so it's smaller streets. It happened to be a Saturday night, so a lot of young people were out drinking, so people were cheering for us through, as we ran through the streets. It was not planned at all. And we covered a lot of territory, and so we reached a lot of people with this spontaneous energy of taking over, running down the wrong ways, the streets, the taxis were honking and supporting us. And it was just like this reclaiming of the streets in a spontaneous way that was really powerful. And then the other protest march that I saw in Berlin a few days ago was also an amazing kind of different style. And that it was an organized protest. It was a group of art students, and they were protesting a building that had asbestos in it that they had been promised was going to be repaired, and then the government, I guess, said that they didn't have enough money, or they changed the plan, so they weren't going to get their building. So they organized this protest, and it was a traditional protest, but they were so unified. There was probably, I'd say, 250 people, but they had created these little performances within the protest. So there was this group of kind of businessmen with cakes, and they were like eating them really violently and like spouting out stuff, and the cake was flying around, and that was a performance that they were doing. Then there was these other people, there was a car with music and they were dancing, and then there was these other people who had this house on wheels that they were rolling around. There was this other track team group that was running through the protest, and then they had these really beautiful songs and things that they were and it was all happening at once, kind of weaving in and out of itself and moving down the street. And there was such energy and with this, performative embodiment of their message that was really so inspiring that I'm seeing the transformation of protests. Even at the beginning, we also were very traditional with the signs and the marches, and we've also, at Occupy Wall Street, has changed the way that we kind of interact with the city and shape our protests.
At the same time, something I saw in the first video with, I don't speak Hungarian, so presumably the fascist group.
It's Slovakian.
Okay.
But you wouldn't know that necessarily from any.
So there was one scene where they were jumping up and down, and Maria said it looks like they're energizing themselves. Remember they're hopping, this tactic? And that's you get your blood flowing so that you can have more endorphins or something to perhaps, have a stage an act of violence, which in fact happened next, right? It was the cops. So the funny thing is that we have a group of a core group of anarchist protesters who are particularly interested in Occupy Wall Street in inventing new tactics from the left, because new tactics that would deal with police repression. One of them is hopping up and down. So there's this whole tactic. So then, I sort of thought that was a great idea that they invented hopping, but it turns out that the nationalists are hopping too. Right? And it's interesting to see that, because you do associate the style of a tactic. I have this idea that tactics are new currency. Sharing tactics over international boundaries is like the new currency, but you associate it with one side, but then it really is confusing to see that these are crossing, lines from left to right. Yeah. And not knowing the language is kind of
Well, I mean, on a similar vein, I was interested in the second video that there were I spotted that it was in Warsaw, I think, the second one, but there were Jobbik kind of group there, which is a Hungarian sort of extreme right party. So it's interesting that this sort of internationalization is also occurring on the right, and they're sort of like, I mean, yeah. Well, I was thinking in terms of what I was saying earlier about the event politics and the hyper-connected activists. So I mean, clearly there's event politics on the right and hyper-connected right-wing activists who are looking forward to opportunities for them to meet together and have this kind of emotional buzz as well. So I mean, it would partly be a question to you maybe that if does a strong emphasis on the effective side of politics. I mean, this is kind of an old question. I mean, does it? There's an effective side of politics in the fascist history in Europe. And is there a problem with focusing more on that you start to you might have difficulties in distinguishing?
Thank you for that question, because I was trying to sort of formulate some of my uncomfortableness with our discussion, where I think we have to be a little bit careful about the boundaries that we draw between these things, and I think that connects also very much to what Witzka and Matteo were talking about with their manifesto as well. Just a couple of examples of blurred boundaries and perhaps a sort of tactical malevolence, if you so will. A few years ago I was in Belgrade, and a friend of mine was talking to me about what he considered to be salon fascism and the rise of a new right that was booted and suited as opposed to booted and shaved head. And really trying to engage a language that was much more conciliatory, much more inclusive. In England, the BNP, the British Nationalist Party, are also talking about multiculturalism in particular ways. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about drawing too stark boundaries. At the same instance, if we think about, say for example, the Black Bloc on the left, and whatever you think of Black Bloc politics or the tactic of property damage, that notion of uniformity on a protest, everybody dressed in black, is a politics of, on the one hand, against repression, so against being identifiable by police, but it is also about against an individualism of just saying, actually we are together, nobody nobody stands out because we are all together and we're all the same. And along similar lines, the Zapatistas, the idea of masking up in order to be visible. So I think there are some. I think it's a conversation where we have to sort of drill even deeper than we have already. It's sort of what is it that we're talking about in terms of, is there an affect of fascism, or is there an affect of progressive politics that we could point to? We would probably, I think we might need to be a little bit more nuanced. But and it made me also think about the criticism of Matteo and Witzka, which I really very much appreciated. I thought that the form of intervention in the manifesto was a very affective provocation. I mean, it embodies affect as a political practice, that kind of manifesto, and I really appreciated that. But it also brought to my mind this issue of if we sort of if we oppose the kind of ethics of care and an ethics of diversity and an ethics of love, etc., versus all the horribleness in the world that we want to get rid of, we might end up in sort of false boundary situation where we end up celebrating the kind of the goodness of humanity if only this horrible system would go away, and if only we could get rid of this horrible capitalism, then the goodness of the human will flourish, which is a little bit you can find also in this kind of the politics of the decision, of consensus decision making. If everybody participates in the decision making process, then we'll come up with the best decision. And I think sometimes it's good to tease out some of the assumptions that lie behind that. The same with Kathy Weeks has just written an excellent book called The Problem with Work, where she talks about the sort of the way that work ethic is so ingrained in us working. And if we think about the sort of hyperactivism that we often end up in, people who are particularly committed end up completely burnt out and overworked, in a way that they're actually producing the same kind of work ethic that we're supposedly trying to refuse, the sort of neoliberal subject of always competing, etc. We sort of end up just as exhausted in many ways. So I think we need to sort of blur the boundaries a little bit and think about the politics of some of these things, which is, like I said, why I appreciated the manifesto, because I think it really brought to light also some ways that we sometimes fall into false boundaries that are too easy to do.
Sorry, I interrupted this, and I have the other events, but I was very much invested in this one, and I heard about the effectiveness of fascism, and things like that, and just wanted to add very shortly that I think that why we really need art in order to challenge extreme right-wing ideas and populist ideas somewhat more broadly is because, of course, the populist and, in a way, especially the extreme right-wing ideas, as we know, simplify and distort understandings of issues, and so they have the advantage of that. So sometimes even in liberal circles, some people might say, and they don't like it, that we need to be a little bit demagogue as well, or populist as well, otherwise we don't have a chance. And I didn't agree with that. And I think that we have to find other ways to capture the imagination of people, and of course in the conversation, the best way I believe in is that, and art is a very powerful thing to do that. And of course the next question is how to rely on art without turning into an instrument, because that might produce bad art, but I think it can be done. It can be done as well, because still stories and all sorts of artistic genres can have impact on communities also, and have some impact actually, I think, in many cases, without being turned to a sort of a massive board that wouldn't really serve as art. So that is just it for me. Thanks. Maybe I forgot to introduce myself. I am Peter Mona, and I am from the Center for Media and Communication Studies here at CU.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a further complication that I forgot about when I was talking about the black bloc. One of the things that I think is quite interesting is in Germany, the right has taken on a lot of some of the tactics and ways of clothing of the sort of left autonomous movement. It's interesting to see what travels of that, and just to return to some of the points you were making, is that so the black clothing and some of the autonomous forms of organizing and protesting, that can travel, but perhaps the carnival can't travel to that fascist, the fascist form of organizing. I don't know. Yeah. Just to add a further complication to the debate.
I just wanted to briefly respond to Peter, what Peter said, because I think, in occupied museums, we've been thinking a lot about about what art is, how art functions within the movement, so that we're not, as I said before, fighting for art, which is exactly the same thing, which is been marketed, so we're not fighting for an art or for our identity as artists, but all of that stuff is like in quotations, and we're letting it hang out there and being open to changing everything from our own identities to the kind of products we produce So, but the spirit, what I would think, even let's forget the word art, the creative spirit that is really working and occupied is the, or everywhere probably, is the ability to step into the mud of experimentation, right? The ability to be truly experimental and get into active situations where the outcome is not known. And that's really my experience as a pretty long-term studio practice of studio art. That's the core, right? It's there is this idea of art as an innovation, and maybe that's an idea that needs to be looked at more. But there is a side to it which is close to science, which you are in an experimental mode, and you don't know what's going to happen next. And there's a power in that which has been highly commodified, but the power works pretty well when it's in movement because you don't think about left or right. You can sort of be incredibly naive isn't the right word, but you can walk into an unknown and try out an action which may fail, but then whatever comes out of that action is like a new piece of information, a very powerful piece of information. So it's as a new definition for art that we're going to work on.
Are there any more comments or anything anyone wants to add at this stage? Or we can also continue the conversation over a glass of wine just outside this door. So
that's the kind of consensus I'm happy
Thank you all for being a wonderful audience. Thank you very much to Gabriella and Tamara for taking us through to